The envelope arrived at Bagram Airfield on a Tuesday morning in October, hand-delivered by a chaplain who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, with 7 words written in careful block letters. "Remember me kindly when this is done." No signature, no explanation, just those 7 words and a set of dog tags that didn't match any active roster. The intelligence officer who opened it felt something cold settle in his chest. The tags belonged to Captain Eva Rourke, call sign Ghoster, an A-10 Thunderbolt pilot who'd been declared killed in action 3 months earlier over the Koringal Valley. Her aircraft had taken catastrophic damage from anti-aircraft fire. Both engines flamed out, hydraulics gone, half the tail section shredded. Last radio contact had been her calm voice saying she was going down. No ejection, no beacon. The wreckage was never found, swallowed by the mountains and the Taliban silence. They'd held a memorial service. Her squadron had painted her name on the ready room wall. Her parents had received a folded flag. And now this letter, postmarked from Kabul 2 days ago, carrying her tags and a message that felt like a ghost's whisper. The intelligence officer walked it directly to the wing commander, who stared at it for 5 full minutes without speaking. The problem was the handwriting. It matched samples from Ghoster's flight logs, her maintenance sign-offs, her letters home. The tags were genuine, serial numbers verified against the master database. But Eva Rourke was dead. Her A-10, tail number 957, was scattered across a mountainside somewhere in Kunar province. Except now there were reports filtering up through special forces, channels unconfirmed, fragmentary, the kind of thing that got dismissed as local superstition. Afghan villagers talking about a plane that wouldn't die, a warthog that kept flying after it should have fallen, attacks on Taliban positions that happened when no coalition aircraft were scheduled in the area. And always afterwards, someone would find empty brass casings on the ground, 30 shells from a GAU-8 Avenger cannon, still warm to the touch. The kind of cannon only an A-10 carried. The wing commander ordered the letter classified immediately. He pulled the personnel file, read through Ghoster's service record again. 217 combat missions, 0 losses in her flight, a reputation for bringing damaged aircraft home when other pilots would have punched out. Before the Air Force, she'd been Army-enlisted infantry, deployed to Ramadi during the surge, earned a Silver Star for actions she never talked about. Switched branches, earned her wings, requested the A-10 specifically. When asked why, she'd said something about unfinished business and debts that needed paying. Nobody had understood what she meant then. Now, staring at those 7 words, the wing commander wondered if they were about to find out. He picked up the secure phone and made a call to Special Operations Command. Something was happening in the mountains. Something that shouldn't be possible. And if Eva Rourke was somehow still alive, still flying, still fighting 3 months after her death, then the question wasn't just how it was why. What kept a pilot in the air after everything that should have brought her down? What debt was worth dying for, and then refusing to stay dead? The answer, when it came, would be written in gunsmoke and blood across the Afghan sky, told in the language of a weapons system designed to refuse surrender. But first, someone had to go looking. Someone had to find the ghost before she became a legend, or before the legend consumed what was left of the woman. The wing commander looked at the duty roster, then at the map of Kunar province spreading across his wall like a topographic nightmare. He gave orders, quiet ones, the kind that didn't go into official logs. Find the A-10, find the pilot, find out what "remember me kindly" really meant, and understand that if Eva Rourke had written those words before heading into whatever hell she'd found, then the remembering might be the only thing left worth doing. They sent Captain Marcus Webb, call sign Steady, because he was the only pilot in the squadron who'd flown wing with Ghoster and understood how her mind worked in combat. He was also the only one who'd asked her once directly what the Silver Star had been for. She'd looked at him for a long moment, then said, "I kept people alive who wanted to die, and killed people who wanted others dead. The Army gives you medals when the math works out in your favor." That had been 2 years ago in the ready room at Kandahar, and he'd never forgotten the flatness in her voice when she said it. Now he was strapping into his own A-10, tail number 961, with orders to fly search patterns over the Korangal Valley and surrounding areas. Officially, he was conducting routine close air support reconnaissance. Unofficially, he was hunting for a ghost who wrote letters and left empty shell casings in places she shouldn't exist. His wingman was Lieutenant Sarah Chenno, Captain Jessica Volkov, call sign Flare, young and aggressive and skeptical of the whole thing. She thought the letter was a Taliban psychological operation, the sightings just local folklore mixed with coalition air activity. Webb didn't argue with her. He just filed his flight plan and rolled toward the runway under a sky that looked like hammered tin. The Korangal Valley spread beneath them like a wound in the earth, steep ridges and narrow canyons where helicopters feared to descend and where entire platoons had vanished into ambushes that became legends. Webb flew low, 2,000 feet above the peaks, eyes scanning for anything unusual. Wreckage, smoke, the glint of metal where metal shouldn't be. Volkov flew combat spread, half a mile out, her voice crisp over the radio complaining about the mission. Steady, this is a waste of gas. We're chasing rumors because some Taliban sympathizer mailed in dead pilots' tags. It's psychological warfare, textbook stuff. Webb keyed his mic. Copy that, Flare, keep your eyes open anyway. For what? A ghost, an A-10 flying on hopes and prayers. For something that doesn't fit the pattern, Webb replied. He banked south, following a ridgeline that dropped into a box canyon the maps called the Valley of the Five Lions. Bad ground. The kind of place where infantry went to die and where air support turned into target practice for whoever controlled the high ground. His radar warning receiver stayed quiet. No surface-to-air threats, no radio traffic, just the endless rumble of his turbofans and the weight of mountains pressing up toward his wings. Then Volkov's voice cut through, sharp and sudden. Steady, I've got smoke. 10 o'clock, maybe 5 clicks. Black smoke, sustained burn. Webb turned, saw it. A column rising from the canyon floor, too thick for a campfire, too isolated for an active firefight. He dropped lower, Volkov moving into trail formation behind him. The smoke came from a wrecked technical truck, burned down to the frame, still smoldering. No bodies, no brass on the ground, but on the hillside above it, someone had arranged rocks into an arrow pointing north. Webb circled once, photographed it with his targeting pod. The rocks were fresh, no dust, no weathering. Placed within the last day or two, he followed the arrow. 20 minutes of flying north brought them to a valley the intelligence maps called Empty Creek, which was local irony because it was full of Taliban supply routes and weapons caches. Webb descended to 1,000 feet, slow and careful, trying to see through the haze. Volkov was quieter now, her earlier skepticism replaced with tactical focus. Then Webb saw it, and his breath caught. An A-10 Thunderbolt, tail number 957, sitting on a flat stretch of ground beside a dry riverbed. The aircraft looked like it had been through an apocalypse. The entire right engine nacelle was blackened and torn, turbine blades visible through shredded cowling. The left stabilizer was missing its top third, edges ragged from explosive damage. Bullet holes stitched across the fuselage in patterns that should have meant structural failure. The canopy was cracked, one side of the windscreen starred with impact marks, but the landing gear was down and locked. The wings were level, and most impossible of all, the GAU-8 cannon in the nose looked clean and operational, the barrel cover removed, the weapon oriented like it was ready to fire. Webb keyed his radio to squadron frequency. Boneyard, this is steady. I have visual confirmation of tail number 957. Aircraft is on the ground but appears structurally intact. No sign of the pilot, requesting instructions. The response took almost a minute. Steady, Boneyard, say again tail number. 957, Ghoster's aircraft, it's here and it looks like someone's been maintaining it. Another long pause, then the wing commander's voice bypassing the tower controller entirely. Steady, this is Hammer. Get eyes on that aircraft. Close inspection. I need to know if it's operational. Webb descended to 500 feet, circling the impossible A-10. Volkov flew high cover, her voice tight. That plane should be scrap metal. How is it even in one piece? Webb didn't answer because he didn't have an answer. He could see details now, the makeshift repairs on the right engine, where someone had welded metal plates over the worst damage. The left stabilizer's missing section had been crudely replaced with sheet aluminum, riveted and sealed. The main gear struts were jury-rigged with what looked like truck parts. It was a horror show of field maintenance, the kind of thing that should never be allowed to fly. But someone had done it. Someone with skill and desperation and access to tools that shouldn't exist in the middle of Taliban territory. Webb completed his circle, then saw something that made him key the mic immediately. "Hammer, there's someone down there. Ground crew, working on the aircraft." He zoomed his targeting pod, the image resolving into clarity. A single figure in flight gear, working beneath the damaged right engine with a wrench and what looked like parts scavenged from a helicopter. Even from this altitude, even through the pod's digital eye, Webb recognized the way she moved. Efficient. No wasted motion. The way Ghoster had always moved on the flight line when she thought nobody was watching. Volkov's voice cracked across the radio. "Is that steady? Is that her?" Webb watched the figure straighten, look up at the sound of his engines. She didn't wave. Didn't signal. Just stood there, wrench in hand, face shadowed by a helmet that had probably been white once but was now the color of desert dust and dried blood. Then she pointed. Not at Webb but past him to the east. Webb spun his aircraft, acquired the new bearing and saw them. Trucks. 8 of them racing along a valley road toward the dry riverbed. Technical vehicles, heavy weapons mounted on the beds. Taliban, moving fast with the confidence of people who own this ground. They'd be on Ghoster's position in under 10 minutes. Webb made the only decision that made sense and probably violated every regulation in the book. Flare, we're going combat. Targets are 8 technical trucks, bearing 085, range 6 kilometers. I'm rolling in hot. Steady, we don't have clearance. Then get it, Webb snapped. Because I'm not letting them get to her. He armed his weapons, dropped his nose, and began the dive that would turn this from a reconnaissance mission into something that wouldn't fit in any official report. Below him, the woman who was supposed to be dead picked up a rifle and started walking toward the approaching storm. The dive turned Webb's world into angles and numbers, airspeed climbing through 300 knots, altitude unwinding fast, the targeting pipper on his HUD tracking across the lead technical truck. The GAU-8 cannon spun up with a sound like industrial machinery coming alive, a mechanical growl that promised violence in 30mm packages. He squeezed the trigger. The cannon spoke, a deep tearing sound that rattled his teeth, and the lead truck disappeared in a cloud of dust and shredded metal. The rounds walked through the vehicle like it was made of paper, punching through the engine block, the cab, the weapon mount, and kept going into the ground beyond. What was left wasn't recognizable as a vehicle. Webb pulled up hard, 7,000 pounds of jet fighter turning into the sky on turbofans that screamed defiance. Volkov came in behind him, her run cleaner and more precise, catching the second truck as it tried to break formation. Her rounds killed the engine and the crew in the same burst, and then she was climbing too, both A-10s clawing for altitude while the remaining trucks scattered like panicked insects. On the ground, Ghoster was running. Webb could see her in his pod, sprinting toward her damaged aircraft with a gait that spoke of old injuries and new desperation. She reached the wing, climbed the ladder faster than should be possible, and disappeared into the cockpit. The Taliban trucks were spreading out, crews bailing from the cabs to set up heavy weapons on whatever high ground they could reach. Webb saw the first muzzle flashes, saw tracers reaching up toward him in lazy arcs that moved faster than they looked. His radar warning receiver screamed as someone locked him up with a man-portable air defense system, a MANPADS, probably a Stinger or an Igla. He punched flares, hot magnesium blooming behind his aircraft like dying stars, and broke hard left. The missile followed his flares, detonated harmlessly 200 meters behind his tail. But now they knew the Taliban had anti-air, which meant this valley had just become significantly more dangerous. Volkov's voice was tight. "Steady, we need to get clear. We don't have the ordnance for a sustained fight." Webb checked his weapons panel. 300 rounds left in the cannon. No missiles. 2 rocket pods, mostly empty. She was right, but it didn't matter. Below him, tail number 957's engines were starting. He could see the exhaust shimmer, could hear the turbines spooling up even over his own aircraft's noise. The impossible A-10 was coming back to life. Ghoster's voice hit the radio, and Webb felt something in his chest unlock when he heard it. Same voice, same calm, same flat affect that suggested she'd seen worse and expected nothing better. "Steady, Ghoster, clear the valley, I'm taking the East Group." Ghoster. Webb's voice cracked on her call sign. "How are you?" "Later," she cut him off. "East Group, 5 trucks. I'm rolling in 30 seconds whether you're clear or not." Webb pulled high and south, Volkov following, both of them gaining altitude to watch what happened next. The damaged A-10 started moving, taxiing forward on landing gear that shouldn't support its weight. Ghoster turned into the wind, advanced the throttles, and began a takeoff roll on a strip of ground that was barely flat enough to qualify as terrain, much less a runway. The aircraft accelerated, slowly, too slowly. The missing stabilizer made it want a weather vane, and Webb could see Ghoster fighting the rudder pedals, keeping the nose straight through brute force and experience. The Taliban were shooting now, muzzle flashes from 4 positions, tracers converging on the accelerating Warthog. Rounds sparked off the armored bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, deflected by titanium plate that was designed for exactly this kind of abuse. Then 957 lifted off, climbing at an angle that looked more like a controlled crash than flight. One engine was running rough, coughing black smoke. The damaged stabilizer made the aircraft yaw left in a slow oscillation that should have meant an immediate return to ground. But Ghoster held it together, kept climbing, and turned east toward the remaining Taliban vehicles. Her cannon fired. From Webb's altitude, it looked like a laser made of light and death, a solid stream of tracers that reached down and touched the earth with apocalyptic precision. The first truck exploded. The second truck's heavy weapon mount disintegrated, the gunner and the weapon both reduced to debris. The third truck tried to flee, made it 20 meters, and died when Ghoster walked her fire through the cab and into the fuel tank. The explosion was large enough that Webb felt the shockwave 4,000 feet up. She was flying like someone who'd forgotten what fear was or remembered it too well to care. The damaged A-10 handled like a wounded animal, but she compensated with constant control inputs, never letting the aircraft do what it wanted, only what she demanded. The fourth truck died. The fifth tried to hide behind a rock formation and died anyway when Ghoster came in from an angle that should have been impossible given her damaged control surfaces. Then she climbed, the smoking A-10 clawing for altitude on 1.5 engines, and Webb saw the problem. She wasn't leveling off. She wasn't turning back. She was heading north deeper into the mountains, toward an area the intelligence maps marked as Tier 1 hostile places where even special forces wouldn't go without division-level support. Webb keyed his mic. "Ghoster, where are you going?" Her response came after a long pause. "Home. Your home is Bagram, turn back, we'll escort you in." "Can't do that, Steady." "Why not?" Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice carried something Webb had never heard from her before, not fear, but something close to it. "Because I made promises, and promises don't care if you're alive or dead. They just care that you keep them." Then she switched frequencies, disappeared from his radio, and kept flying north into country that had killed better pilots in better aircraft. Webb watched her go, the smoking A-10 getting smaller against the mountains until it was just a dark spot against gray stone, and then nothing at all. The debrief lasted 6 hours and satisfied nobody. Webb sat across from the wing commander, from intelligence officers, from a full colonel who'd flown in from Qatar specifically for this meeting, and told them everything he'd seen. He showed them the gun camera footage, the targeting pod recordings, the radio transcripts. They listened with expressions that shifted from skepticism to confusion to something that might have been belief, or might have been the kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to categorize the impossible. The intelligence officer kept returning to the same question. "Captain Webb, you're certain it was the same aircraft? 957. "Yes, sir. Tail number visible. Airframe damage consistent with the original shoot-down reports. And you're certain it was Captain Rourke? Voice match is conclusive, sir. I flew with her for 8 months. I know her flying style. It was Ghoster. The colonel from Qatar, a man named Harding with 3 rows of ribbons and eyes like a competitive accountant, leaned forward. Captain Webb, let's talk about what's actually possible here. An A-10 takes the kind of damage described in the original shoot-down report. Both engines out, hydraulics gone, half the tail missing. The pilot doesn't eject. The aircraft crashes somewhere in the mountains. Correct so far? Yes, sir. So we have a dead pilot and a destroyed aircraft. Now 3 months later, you're telling me that same aircraft is flying combat missions, that the pilot is alive, somehow repaired a catastrophic loss, and is conducting unauthorized strikes against Taliban positions. That's what the evidence shows, sir. The evidence, Harding said slowly, shows something. What it shows is the question. He pulled out a file, spread satellite imagery across the table. We've been going back through overhead coverage of the Korangal Valley for the past 3 months. Do you know what we found? Webb shook his head. Gaps, Harding said. Deliberate gaps. Someone with access to our satellite schedules has been timing their activities to avoid overhead surveillance. Someone with training. Someone who knows how we operate. Webb felt something cold settle in his stomach. You think she's compromised? Working with the Taliban? I think, Harding said carefully, that we have a pilot who's supposed to be dead, flying an aircraft that should be scrap, operating in territory we don't control, and avoiding detection with tradecraft that suggests either extensive Taliban support or something else we haven't figured out yet. What do you think, Captain? Webb looked at the satellite photos, at the empty valleys and the dark mountains, and thought about Ghoster's voice on the radio. The flatness, the exhaustion, the way she'd said promises don't care if you're alive or dead. He thought about her army service, about Ramadi, about a silver star for actions she never discussed. He thought about what kind of promises would keep someone fighting after they should have been dead, and what kind of debt would be worth paying with an aircraft that was held together by improvisation and refusal to quit. I think, Webb said slowly, that she's still fighting the war she started before she joined the Air Force, and I think she's doing it alone because she doesn't trust anyone else to finish it. The room went quiet. Harding closed the file. Captain Webb, I'm authorizing a search and recovery operation. We're going to find Captain Rourke, we're going to bring her home, and we're going to figure out what the hell is actually happening in those mountains. You're going to lead the air component. Colonel Vance will lead the ground component. You leave in 48 hours. Webb stood, saluted. As he was leaving, the wing commander stopped him. Webb, off the record, do you think she wants to be found? Webb considered that. Considered the letter, the message. Remember me kindly. Considered a pilot who'd written what sounded like a goodbye and then refused to die. No, sir, he said finally. I think she's trying to finish something, and I think finding her before she's done might be the worst thing we could do. Noted, the wing commander said. Find her anyway. Webb walked out into the Afghan sun and wondered what kind of war you fought when the enemy was in the mountains and your own pilot was the ghost. The operation launched from a forward operating base called Blessing, which was a cosmic joke considering what the base mostly saw was rockets and mortartum fire. Webb flew up with Volkov and 2 other A-10 pilots, call signs Hammer and Dust, while Colonel Vance brought in a Special Forces team and a detachment of Rangers who looked young enough to be in high school. The intelligence briefing was sparse because intelligence about this part of Afghanistan was always sparse. The area north of the Korangal was officially labeled Indian country, which was military slang for places where the enemy on the ground and coalition forces visited only when they had to. The map showed 5 valleys where satellite imagery had detected possible wreckage or maintenance activity. All 5 were at least 2 hours flight time from the nearest coalition base. All 5 were in Taliban strongholds. And all 5 had been flagged with the notation, UAS lost to enemy action, which meant that even the drones didn't come back from those valleys. Vance gathered his team in the operations center, a plywood shack with a map table and a coffee maker that had been making terrible coffee since 2009. He was older than most combat colonels, gray at the temples, with eyes that suggested he'd seen enough that very little impressed him anymore. He pointed at the northernmost valley on the map. This is our primary search area. The Panjshir Spur, though locals call it the Valley of Knives. Taliban use it as a logistics hub. They move weapons, personnel, and opium through here down to Pakistan. It's heavily defended, which means they've got something worth defending. Intelligence suggests there might be a high-value target operating from one of the compounds in the valley floor. He looked at Webb. Your job is to provide close air support and reconnaissance. You find that A-10, you mark it, you let me know. You do not engage unless I give explicit clearance. And if we make contact with Captain Rourke, Webb asked. Then you try to talk her down, Vance said. And if she won't come willing, you let me know that too. We're not leaving one of ours in that valley, Captain. Not alive, not dead, and definitely not flying around like some kind of insurgent air force. The team moved out before dawn, helicopters carrying the Rangers to a landing zone 5 kilometers south of the target area. Webb and his flight launched 30 minutes later, climbing into a sky that was still dark at the edges, stars fading into the gathering light. They flew north in a loose combat spread, 4 A-10s against the mountains, weapons armed and radios quiet. The Panjshir Spur revealed itself gradually, a deep cut in the Hindu Kush that looked like God had taken an axe to the earth. Steep ridges, narrow valleys, small compounds clinging to the hillsides like barnacles on a ship's hull. Webb descended to 3,000 feet, eyes scanning for anything unusual. His targeting pod showed compounds, vehicles, people moving in the early morning light. Normal activity. Farmers, shepherds, maybe Taliban logistics personnel pretending to be farmers and shepherds. No sign of an A-10. No sign of anything that shouldn't be there. Then Hammer's voice cut through. Lead, I've got something. 10 o'clock, 2 kilometers, structure that doesn't match the local architecture. Webb turned, acquired the bearing. There on a hillside above a small compound was what looked like a hangar. Makeshift, constructed from scavenged materials and camouflage netting, but unmistakably a hangar. Large enough to hide an aircraft. Large enough to hide an A-10. Webb zoomed his pod, tried to see through the netting. Movement inside, people working. And at the far end, partially visible through a gap in the camouflage, the distinctive nose profile of a warthog. The 7-barrel rotary cannon, the angle of the windscreen. He keyed his radio to the ground frequency. Venom 6, this is steady. I have eyes on a possible aircraft shelter, marking with laser now. Copy that, steady. Moving to investigate. Give me a route that keeps us out of direct observation from the valley floor. Webb checked the terrain, plotted a path that used the ridgelines as cover. Recommend you approach from the south, use the creek bed for concealment. Be advised there's activity around the target. Count 6 personnel visible, possibly more inside the structure. The Rangers moved like smoke through the mountains, and Webb watched their progress through his targeting pod. It took them 40 minutes to reach the hangar, approaching from an angle that kept them hidden from the compound below. Vance's voice was a whisper on the radio. Steady, we're in position. Confirm that 6 personnel? Affirm. 4 outside, 2 inside the structure. No visible heavy weapons, but assume small arms. Copy. Moving in. Webb watched the Rangers breach the hangar, fast and smooth and professional. He heard the radio chatter, clear left, clear right. I've got eyes on the aircraft, it's definitely an A-10. Then a pause, and Vance's voice again, different now, confused. Steady, you need to see this, I'm uploading imagery. The pictures came through Webb's data link, and he felt his understanding of the situation tilt sideways. The hangar was full of parts. Engine components, hydraulic systems, avionics gear, all laid out with military precision. Tools, wrenches, rivet guns, welding equipment arranged on makeshift benches. And in the center, like a shrine or a testament, was tail number 957. But the aircraft wasn't operational. Couldn't be operational. The right engine was completely removed, the nacelle empty. The left stabilizer was off, lying on the ground beside the fuselage. The cockpit was open, the instrument panel partially disassembled. This wasn't a combat-ready A-10. This was an A-10 being systematically cannibalized for parts. Webb stared at the images, his mind trying to reconcile what he'd seen 3 days ago, the aircraft taking off, firing its cannon, flying combat, with what the Rangers were showing him now. Venom 6 confirmed that's 957. Confirmed, tail number visible, but steady, this aircraft hasn't flown in months. Maybe longer, which meant the A-10 Webb had seen, the one Ghoster had flown into the mountains, was something else. Another aircraft. Another impossible thing in a situation that was rapidly running out of rational explanations. Before Webb could process that, his radar warning receiver screamed, and the world became fire and mathematics. The missile came from the north, a Soviet-era SA-7 launched from a ridge position that Webb's sensors hadn't even marked as hostile. His defensive systems caught it late, barely enough warning for him to break hard right and punch flares. The missile tracked through his countermeasures, came close enough that he felt the shockwave when it detonated, and then he was diving for the deck with his radar warning receiver still screaming about multiple lock-ons. Volkov's voice was sharp. "Steady, we're painted." Multiple sources, I count 4 distinct radars. This is a trap. Webb's mind caught up with the situation. The hangar was bait. The half-disassembled A-10 was bait. They'd been drawn into a kill zone by an aircraft that couldn't fly, while somewhere else in these mountains was the real 957 and the real Ghoster, watching this unfold like a chess game played with lethal pieces. He keyed the ground frequency. Venom 6, extract immediately. This location is compromised. Repeat, extract now. Copy that. Moving. Vance's transmission cut off as heavy weapons fire erupted from 3 positions around the compound. The Rangers were pinned, caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Webb could see them on his targeting pod, taking cover behind the hangar's walls while Taliban fighters swarmed down from the ridges. The volume of fire was incredible, disciplined, the work of experienced fighters who'd done this before. He armed his cannon, rolled in hot. The world narrowed to crosshairs and target markers, to the distance closing between his aircraft and the ground, to the moment when he squeezed the trigger and let the GAU-8 speak its 30mm truth. The cannon rounds tore through the first fighting position, silenced the machine gun that had been chewing up the Rangers' cover, and bought them maybe 10 seconds of breathing room. Webb pulled up, GS pressing him into his seat, and watched Hammer roll in behind him. Then his radio crackled with a voice he'd been both hopping and dreading to hear. "Steady, Ghoster, you're missing the real fight." Webb's finger hovered over the transmit button. "Ghoster, where are you?" "Where I need to be," she replied. "That compound you're protecting, it's not what you think.